because I was asked to do a presentation for the community about making our spaces safer for LGBTQ identified folks. I love doing this work. I love doing this work for a lot of reasons. Oh, that looks lovely. The first thing that I think this is so important is people all the time ask me, like, why are we talking about this? We could be talking about so many other social issues, different folks and their different identities, and I think that's important. This isn't a, we only need to talk about LGBTQ issues. We need to talk about lots and lots and lots of communities that have not been talked about for a long time. And I love this quote by Audre Lorde, who sort of says that it's not the differences that we need to recognize. We need to recognize those differences, because once we acknowledge and accept them and celebrate them, then we can really start to create that community. And I really feel like, especially when I do a presentation for a community, that's really where I want to start. As Lisa said, PFLAG does stand for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, but we do way, way, way more than that. We do support groups, but our support groups are not only for folks that are LGBTQ, but also for parents. Really, that's where we really primarily started out. We have two types of support groups here in Greater Boston. First is the traditional open LGBTQ group. There's a flyer there. We have about, I think, 9 locations that those are, from Lowell to Plymouth. Long area, big area of support groups that meet once a month or twice a month. We also do closed support groups, and these are specifically for parents of transgender folks. We have those in 3 locations: Andover, Easton, and Waltham. Along with that, we also do other ways of support. We have a one-to-one program, so if you know someone that maybe wouldn't want to go to a meeting but does need some support, we have a list of almost 100 volunteers that have said, you can contact me with people. I want to help other people get to where I am. So that's really, really cool, especially if there's a social barrier, an economic barrier, a cultural, racial barrier that makes someone not feel as comfortable in a support group. We definitely want to still provide that support. We do a helpline as well. This is our sort of third big support thing that's totally run by volunteers. You can call the helpline or email the helpline email at any time, and they're going to steer you to the right people, the right resources. So it's really cool that we're able to offer that as well. Primarily what I do is the education piece. So I go to schools most often, and I talk to parents, and I talk to teachers, and I talk to kids. It's so funny because every time I have this conversation, we start talking with an administrator, they're like, oh, but the kids, and the kids are like, it's never a big deal. It's always harder for the grown-ups to sort of talk about this stuff. I also go to places like here. I do trainings for the public. I do trainings for library staff, medical offices, corporations and workplaces, community spaces, religious spaces, really anyone that, any community that wants to be safer. I really like to dig in and help them figure out ways to do that. So I'm pretty much everywhere. And finally, we do advocacy. So advocacy looks a lot like Yes on 3, which happened last year. We helped the ballot measure pass, which was really exciting because that was really terrifying, and it was the first time something like that had been voted on. That consisted of a lot of weekends and phone banks and things. But we also do advocacy that's not so, I guess that was more of like a campaign. We also serve on the LGBTQ Youth Commission through the Department of the Governor's Office, I think. And we also do help push our legislators and help give our legislators the tools to pass the ban on conversion therapy that happened this cycle, so that type of thing. So we really are sort of everywhere, and we do as much as we can to support, educate, and advocate for the LGBTQ community. So this is me. My bio isn't always read, and a lot of times people read me as straight, so I like to immediately talk about how I'm not at all. This is my wife at our engagement, at our wedding, and during our wedding. So I do this work for lots of reasons, as I said. First and foremost, because I'm part of the community. And second, because I'm really, really passionate about children's health. All of the work that Lisa mentioned that I do, actually all of that was around children as well as around youth and making sure that we're living healthy, happy lives. We actually have so many kids in our lives, just like from our work and from the things we do. We had to have a full children's sermon at our wedding. There's more children sort of on the other sides of the pews, but you know, it's just a huge part of my identity and my career and my personal life. So really passionate about that. And I say that because we know that kids are not doing great in the LGBTQ community. Kids are hearing negative things from their families. This is new data from 2018. It's national data, but the Massachusetts data doesn't look that different. So this is the national data, but they broke down Massachusetts data as well on lots of different points, but not this specific point. So you can kind of compare them, and it's not that different. Folks are not comfortable being who they are at home because of parent attitudes, and that's because it's scary when something with your child changes that you never thought about. And I think PFLAG, what we try to do is really understand that piece. It's like, we get that it's like scary and confusing and you didn't learn this in school. So we wanna make sure that parents have all the tools they need to learn. At the same time, I think a lot of people in this area think that we live in a safe little bubble, and we don't. We absolutely don't. People laugh when I say I'm from North Carolina, but they're very similar. North Carolina and Massachusetts are super similar. I think if we weren't so gerrymandered, we'd be really similar. We also know that family support is the most important piece of a child having a good outcome. We're going to look at some statistics in a second that are going to be scary, especially if you have LGBTQ youth in your life. But I want you to understand that that's a statistic, and we know exactly what to do to sort of help that statistic not be true for that child, and that's family support. We have all the data shows family support says, less likelihood of homelessness, less likelihood of, mental health disaster, less likelihood of crisis, suicide attempt. That's what that says. So I hope that we can give everybody tools to make sure that they can bring that into their communities. So in school, or the other place where kids are, is that they're not feeling safe and they're not hearing positive messages. And I hear this from every school. I even hear this from schools where the principal's like, we're doing great. We have these gender neutral bathrooms and our GSA is thriving. But the kids will come to me when I go to their GSA and say, well, someone called me the F slur, or someone called me the T slur yesterday. I'm hearing these words all the time. People say no homo all the time. So kids are not feeling safe in school. I will say, just as a nerd tip, the library is the safest place in the school per our data, which I think is super interesting. And I think it's really important that if you work in the library, to understand that space, because it's so quiet, positive, where you can just sort of be without anyone bothering you, I think is really powerful for our kids and in the community, I think. Okay, I'll stop being a nerd. So these are what our most recent Youth Risk Behavior Survey results say for Massachusetts. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey is a survey that folks take in school every 2 years. So the 2017 just got released like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. So this is really fresh data, even though 2017 feels like a long time ago. I have the statistics broken down between LGBTQ folks and non-LGBTQ folks, and then synthesized by the time, the percentages of like what that means. And it's better in some ways than the 2015 data, but this statistic, like 5.8 times more likely to do or to use opioids or to use heroin, that's really terrifying, and that's not what we saw the survey before that. So it might be that folks are just using different coping skills. It's really scary because this statistic about suicide attempts was just in the last year. It wasn't in their life. And I think that can be really, I hope that's really jarring for folks, but in a way that doesn't totally bum them out, right? That's what I always say with this slide, is like, I hope this just helps you see the real picture about what's going on in Massachusetts right now with our kids. These statistics are also printed out back there, so if anybody wants to take them home. So, I want to create a beloved community. This is my passion. I want to create a community where we celebrate difference, we don't ignore it, and we talk about how that difference can make our communities richer and truer and more real for everyone, and so everyone can participate in them. And in order to do that, we have to do some hard critical work that is uncomfortable and can make people feel resistant. And so I preface that to say, we're going to talk about gender, and we're going to talk about the gender binary. The gender binary just obviously says that there are things that women should be like and do and look and love in this way, and men should do this, their man thing, right? That you should be able to know somebody's sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, what they like to do in their spare time, all at the same time, and it looks like this way or this way. And we know this is a bunch of crap, right? We know this isn't true. And I say that because people will be like, yeah, of course that isn't true. But then at middle schools, these kids are born after 2000, right? After 2005. I go and I'll say, has anyone in here ever been told to be more ladylike? Every woman identified person in that room raises their hand. And that's because we're still policing this unconsciously. And by policing this and by saying this is what a boy should be and this is what a girl should be, we take away the possibility of anything else. And that's so sad because humans are way more complicated than two boxes. However exciting it is and helpful it is for our brain to put things in two boxes, it doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for humans. Thank you, Ellen, right? Ellen showed us that. Not necessary. So the most important thing I would like you to take away from this slide, or from this presentation today, is this slide, where we talk about how, we're going to talk about how your sex assigned at birth and your gender identity don't have to match, and they don't have to be related to each other. That your sexual orientation, your romantic orientation, your gender expression, all of these things, just because we know one, doesn't mean we know anything else. And that's really hard because we've linked these things in our brain together. So what we have to do now is the hard work of unlinking. But we're smart, we've got this, right? Let's jump in. Sex assigned at birth, this is the easiest definition I'll show you tonight. This is just the sex you were assigned at birth. Pretty simple, right? There's gonna be sort of a pattern in every definition. We're gonna put on the outside what the expected norm is, and then in the middle, sort of what else could exist. And we expect that the baby's gonna be born and the doctor's gonna say, oh, it's a girl, oh, it's a boy. Healthy baby, congrats, right? And that works for a lot of babies. A lot of babies, that's successful. However, not all babies, right? We know that 1 out of 2,000 babies are born somewhere in between, and the doctors have to make a decision. Those babies are not assigned, they're not male or female babies. They are intersex babies. And that's just okay, right? That's just another category of people. So intersex means, it can mean like physical organs, like I said, 1 out of 2,000 births, but it could also mean differences in chromosomes, differences in our hormones and how they work in our bodies. All of these, there's, I think about 2% of folks on the planet are intersex, depending on the exact definition of intersex you use. And I think that's important because we don't know about this, because this is private. This is people's private bodies, their private, private struggles. Some people don't find out they're intersex until they're trying to have a baby, or they go through puberty, or they want to have a surgery later in life and they find this out. I think it's important to talk about because we don't talk about it. Another reason that I like to talk about intersex is because even human biology is queer, right? Even human biology goes beyond these two boxes. We are not we're not two-box species. We are just, there's way more variation, there's way more interesting things going on, and that's cool about us, right? The third reason I like to talk about intersex folks is because we don't talk about them very much, a lot of bad things happen to them. One of those things is a lot of them have surgeries that are purely cosmetic, so they fit into one of those boxes, and this can be long-term negative effects. So I know I've saw someone speak who was intersex, had a surgery, and they now have to take hormones every single day, and if they don't take hormones, they go through osteoporosis. They go through menopause. They also have osteoporosis, and they're 24. And this is just because of a surgery they had when they were a baby that they didn't need to look more typically female. And this happens with a lot of folks. These are some famous activists, but there's not a huge activist I mean, there is an incredible activist population, but it's nothing like the LGBTQ folks. So it's really important that we start to talk about these folks. These types of surgeries just became illegal in California, but that's the only state that they're illegal in. Yeah, go ahead.
Illegal when the baby's born.
Oh, until everyone can get consent.
Right. So is that a certain age it becomes?
The California law is really unspecific.
Okay.
But I think it's really interesting to talk about because sometimes intersex folks need surgery in order to use the bathroom or whatever thing they need, or they want it, and that's totally cool too. But it's funny because we always joke about how trans folks like want surgery and intersex folks don't want surgery, and like why can't we just flip it, right? It's like so silly. But yeah, in that way, people are it's all about trying to keep this binary the way that we want. Super interesting. I'm reading a book right now that's fascinating. Yeah.
I've read that, and I could be wrong, some of the reading I've done, medical profession isn't just automatically saying when that baby is born intersex, so automatically assigning, like going to the parents and saying, well, the baby should be this.
Right.
Is that more the case, or does it depend?
So it's really changing a lot right now. I think that was the case, and there's actually like some terrible, terrible literature on it that was published in the past about like how to do those surgeries and when to do those surgeries. But I think right now this is really something that we're going to start. I think the medical community is definitely starting to talk about how do we do it. Yeah, and I think because of the fact that it doesn't happen always right when the baby's born, that they know that the baby's intersex. People think it happens a lot less than it does. Because people can have lots of different varieties of chromosomes or have a hormone receptor that doesn't work or whatever, and they're starting to show characteristics that are outside of female and outside of male, sort of in the middle somewhere. Yeah. I love talking about intersex, but we'll move on. Sexual orientation. So this was, we did the hard one, we'll do an easy one now. Sexual orientation we know about because of, again, Ellen, thank you, right? Coming out and telling us about what lesbians are. But this is just the desire and the sexual feelings that we have for other people. I always get asked what my husband does. And I don't have one of, I was like, I don't know, I've never met my husband, I don't know. I'd be surprised if he existed. And this is what we just sort of assume, especially folks fit our picture of like what a girl is and what a boy is. We're like, oh, cool. Sam's probably got a husband, she has a ring on, right? In fact, we know this is absolutely not true. There's a lot of different ways to experience sexual attraction. I'll go through some definitions with you all. Gay, meaning that it's sort of an umbrella term for the whole population of sexual orientation. So if someone asked me if I was gay, I would be like, yeah, I'm bisexual. But it can also mean men who exclusively are attracted to men, right? Lesbian, women that are attracted to other women. Bisexual, attracted to men, women, plus. So we know there's different genders and we'll get into that, but it's 2+ genders, right? Pansexual, meaning that you are attracted to folks beyond gender. There's a lot of confusion sometimes between bisexual and pansexual. So if someone's thinking that, great question. My answer is yes. It depends on who you're talking to. It depends on how they define it for themselves. And a lot of people really prefer one term over the other. Some people use them interchangeably. But yeah, it can really just be depending on how you're experiencing your own sexuality, which is a cool thing we do in the LGBTQ community is we have these awesome labels that people can use, and they can mean whatever they want them to mean, because we want people to have something that's authentically theirs. And so that's my soapbox for labels. Asexual, meaning you don't experience sexual attraction towards other people. Queer, one of those words that makes people wince. I know I said it earlier before I talked about being the word queer, and I was like, uh-oh, people might be upset. So queer is a word that a lot of people have experienced in a negative way. And that's true, and that's valid. And I always let people know that if they're uncomfortable with using the word queer, that's okay, because that experience is real. However, when I go to 4th graders and I ask them, who here has heard the word queer used in a nice way? all of their hands go up. That's what they think that word means. Then they at some point between 6th grade, the beginning of 6th grade and the end of 6th grade, they figure out it can be used in a mean way, right? And then some of them try it out. But yeah, so we know that that's still used in a way that's condescending, meant to cause harm, meant to cause hurt, meant to cause fear. But a lot of people are using that in a way to mean as an umbrella term for the LGBTQ community, or as a term to describe how they are, meaning not cisgender, not straight, but not sure, or as a term that is sort of like, well, I don't exactly know, none of these labels really fit me, but this fits me, queer fits me. When we're talking about queer in a larger sense, that could be around gender or sexual orientation. Cool. Demisexual is when you're attracted only to Demi Lovato. Thank you for laughing. Just kidding. It's when I feel like we needed a joke because it's getting kind of dark in here. It's when you only find people attractive after you've developed a deep friendship or deep relationship with them. So I think this one is really helpful and so cool. I went to college not that long ago. I'm very young still. But even when I was studying this in college, how these terms have sort of come alive and they've intricately been theorized by kids, right? Because they're talking about this and they're going, oh, well, I think I'm probably that, but maybe this too. So I have a friend that's demisexual, considers himself asexual as well, and bisexual, right? All those things sort of apply to her experience, which is cool. It's a way to describe ourselves and talk about what more fully who we are. Any questions about this sexual orientation? Okay, cool. There are more sexual orientation terms than this. They're going to get invented all the time. That's really cool. I always like to say, it's okay if you don't know the term that someone's using. It's not okay to be like, ugh, people are just making stuff up these days. That's less respectful. It's always fine to be like, I don't know that word, tell me more about it. People love talking about themselves. They will, if they found this new thing about themselves and they trust you, they're gonna wanna talk about it, so just ask. All right, cool. So I'm not gonna change the slide. Instead, I want you to imagine that word sexual is now romantic, and I want you to imagine the desires and sexual feelings to say the romantic feelings. So what we've done as a community is we've separated these things to say, well, I have sexual attraction to these groups of people are in this way, and my romantic attraction is different. So someone could be asexual but not aromantic, meaning they want a relationship, but they don't want, they're not that interested in sex, right? They're not that sexually attracted to people, which is really cool, an interesting way to think about our sexuality. It's what are they gonna come up with next, right? This is a very cool way to start thinking about ourselves, and it is more complicated than just who we're attracted to, right? Awesome. Now we're going to talk about gender identity. This is one's own internal understanding of who they know themselves to be. So if everyone could point to your brains, that would be fabulous. All right, now point away. Now point back to your brains. I just taught you the gender identity dance. Now you'll never forget what it means. You just do this, because gender identity happens in your brain. It doesn't matter anything about your body or anything about how you dress or how you look or whatever. It's just who you know yourselves to be. So I was assigned female at birth and identify as a woman. So I'm cisgender. I'm a cisgender woman. I fit right there in that box. A man who is assigned male at birth, he identifies as a man, right? Cisgender man. That's not always how it works, but sometimes it does, and that's what we're called, cisgender. But let's make sure we know. We'll do a test, okay? Cisgender means gender identity is the same, that's what cis means, as your sex assigned at birth. So Michelle Obama was assigned female at birth, identifies as a woman. She is a cisgender female. Okay, George Clooney, assigned male at birth, identifies as a man. He is a Oh, everyone did so great. Great. Ellen, assigned female at birth, identifies as a lesbian, identifies as a woman, and dresses masculinely. Ellen is a Great. Good job. It's confusing. It's totally confusing, especially when you've been linking sexual orientation and gender identity together for so long to sort of try to pull them apart. Because Ellen's sexuality doesn't matter when we're talking about gender identity. She's a cisgender woman. She's just attracted to women, but that's totally different. Okay, so now that you know that, I feel confident that we got the next slide. Transgender. Literally, trans means different, does not align. Transgender identity means that your gender identity and your sex assigned at birth don't match, they don't align. And there's sort of two major umbrellas of ways people describe their experience being trans. First, we have binary trans people. These are folks that are trans women or trans men. So trans women are folks that were assigned male at birth but identify as women. I have two examples up here, Laverne Cox and Christine Hallequist. Laverne Cox is obviously an actress and an advocate, and Christine Hallequist was the first major party nominee for governor in Vermont, and is a trans woman. So we see folks, especially in the binary trans sort of world, starting to really be involved in our public life, right? Which is really awesome. Once we sort of understand, the binary, which we've talked about, we understand this, because it's also in a binary. But does anyone have any questions about just the binary trans identity, trans men and trans women? Okay, we will talk about trans etiquette and all that stuff in a minute, so if you're have a million questions and you don't know where to start, don't worry, we'll go back. Also, we have non-binary identities. I know Jonathan Van Ness just came out yesterday or today as non-binary, which just means that they don't identify as men or women. Doesn't matter what you're assigned at birth. These are a couple of different famous trans non-binary folks. Something about non-binary folks is some of them don't like to be called transgender because there's such a binary identity attached to the word transgender. So they might prefer non-binary or gender non-conforming. Still conceptually under the trans umbrella, but if they don't want to claim that, that's totally fine, totally up to them. This is some language around gender identity around non-binary gender identity that you might see. There's a lot of language. There's way more than this. This is just some. We know that genderqueer and non-binary are sort of the umbrella terms, but some people prefer one over the other. Some people say genderqueer. Or gender fluid. Agender is up there, which is sort of folks that don't acknowledge gender because it's not a part of them. There's always third gender folks. We don't have a third gender in our mainstream culture, but there are a lot of cultures through the world that do have a third gender. For example, the Native folks here in the United States before colonialism and that disaster, they were a lot of folks that were two-spirited, meaning both and, right? Yes?
How would you, if you're third gender, how would you say, because that's what I am and I've never had anybody explain that to me, so how do you say that? Because if I say transgender, people are just so confused by it.
Sure, and I think that's a great example of why people don't non-binary people sometimes don't use trans.
I prefer to say transgender almost to be to stand up for people who are.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Get out the incorrect thing with me, so if you say it to somebody who no, for real, that's why I came out, because I
right.
can take it,
right.
a kid might not be able
right,
to,
exactly.
so I'd rather say something ignorant to me.
Yeah, I get that, for sure. So it would just depend, it would just depend on what you wanted to do. I was also going to talk about these terms up here, which might also feel more true for you, but would also do the same thing, which is transmasculine and transfeminine. I love these words, and I love kids, and I work with kids a lot, and one of my speakers, I drive him to speaking engagement to drive him home, so I always grill him about language when we're driving, and I was like, okay, what does transmasculine mean to you? And he said, oh yeah, transmasculine. It's when you're dude-ish, but you're not 100% a dude. And I was like, okay, is it a gender identity word? Is it a gender expression word? And he was like, yeah. Which just shows you the nature of the language that we're talking about. So I think that, it's just really who you are when you're describing that to people. And obviously there's going to be people that are cool, tell me more about that. And some people that are oh, what? And that sucks, but it is. So yeah, there's other language up here too that I didn't talk about. Gender fluid, we didn't talk about when folks sometimes identify in different spaces on the gender spectrum, sometimes preferring different pronouns. And of course, people use these words and mean something totally different sometimes, and that's totally okay too. Again, you can always pull that out of your pocket when you can say, oh, can you tell me more about that? It's totally fine to say that, and respectful. All right, lastly, we'll talk about gender expression, which is really what this picture is all about. You wouldn't know these folks are non-binary if we didn't have those clothes. The gender expression, I think, is cool here. And a lot of times when I'm in middle schools, I do get giggles at the slide because it makes people uncomfortable when gender expression doesn't look the way you want it to look, or where your brain wants it to look. But this is just our external way of being, the way that we present ourselves, the way we do our gender, right? However, conceptually, yes, we perform gender, but like I didn't think about how girly I was going to be tonight when I got dressed. I just wanted to be comfortable, and I wanted to be dressing in a way to make me confident. I always say to kids, I want to dress like closest to pajamas as possible. That's my full style goal. And when I shop, because of the way my body is, and because of what I prefer and what I like, and when I pick off the shelves, it just turns out that it's feminine. It's coded feminine in our world. So yeah, I'm over here, way over here. But it's not because I was like, I'm going to be feminine today. It was like, I'm going to wear the thing I want to wear today. It happens to be feminine. Sometimes it's less feminine, Also, what's coded masculine and what's coded feminine changes, and what's allowed for masculine and what's allowed for feminine changes. So I think that's really important to acknowledge as well. Because we always, because these things are stuff we've made up, they change, because we change. Cool, and that is almost the end of our definitions. The last one is questioning, and this is my favorite, and I think it's the most important, is that people can be LGBTQ and not ready to tell you. Not ready to tell themselves, not ready to identify which letter they are, or where they are, not know exactly where they fit in. And this is a lot of times where folks are the most vulnerable before they claim their identity, right? So they can feel like, oh, there's not a place for me. So I think it's really important. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know any trans people, and that might be true, but it probably isn't. You probably do know trans people. It just might not be that you know they're trans, that you don't know that they're trans. So I think that's really important when we start talking about etiquette, and we start talking about interacting with trans folks or non-binary folks, because you know them. They live in your communities, they go to school with your children, they go to church with you, they are in the library with you, and if we can get folks to a place where they can be who they are in a safe way, then we're not gonna lose so many folks. And we're not gonna have so many heartbreaking stories of folks. And with that, I thought we might take a 5-minute break. We're really going to talk about specifically trans identities. I feel like this is a place where a lot of people have questions and they don't even know how to say their questions. And I always, this is I've been doing this presentation in some way since September. So this is about 6-8 months of people's questions on here. But if you have something else that you don't see that you have a question about, please let me know, because I'll add it so somebody else doesn't have to ask that question next time. Cool. So I love Brene Brown. I love how she talks about courage. Watch her Netflix special, read all of her books. But I really think that this is the piece, right? We can either be brave or not. And if we want to be comfortable, if that's more important to us, that's what it is. And I think we should acknowledge that. And if that's not what it is, if having courage and meeting these kids and these folks where they are, and living into that uncomfortableness, to me, that's more valuable, right? So let's do it. Let's talk about it. Big shifts. We see big shifts in data. 7% of boomers identifying as LGBTQ and 20% of millennials, which is sort of my both sides. I'm right in the middle. Interesting. This happens for 3 reasons. I think people use this for saying, oh, people are just pretending or confused or it's a fad. It's the data says there's less boomers than millennials, whatever. So a couple of things happened in between the boomers and the millennials. One is we got the internet. And there are people that grew up like maybe 10 years older than me that didn't have a word for bisexual. So they didn't know what they were. And there was no way to get that word. And when they went to college or they met somebody who was bisexual, they were like, oh. But like we have the ability to do that when we're 7 years old, right? Or when we were 10 years old. So I knew I was gay when I was like 12, right? Because I just Googled it. I was like, right? Like that's right. I appreciate you in the back. I appreciate your giggles. Thank you. Second reason is because they died. They died from AIDS. They died from suicide. They died from drugs. Yeah, they're not here because they did not live to be old. And I think that's a huge thing that people don't think about. But we lost that whole generation because there was no place for them. And the third reason is not in my brain right now. Oh, the third reason is we have more words. So we're becoming more aware of all these things. Like the people that, our forefathers who had to live and struggle, you could be gay or you could be a lesbian. And gay looked like this and lesbian looked like this. Does that sound like anything? Right? They were saying, okay, well, a man can be this and a woman can be this. But we didn't even get this idea that things are so much more complicated than that until more recently. So there is no, it's a rumor and it's a lie that we're just pretending and there's more of us. There just is more of us. I know, I have memes in here for the kids and I forgot to take this one out and I'm so sorry. But I think this is a question I got last night at dinner with my uncle and his husband is like, but to be transgender you have to have surgery, right? And I was like, no. Right? But this is a very common misconception. You don't have to do anything to be transgender. You just are. You're transgender when you understand that your sex assigned at birth and your gender identity don't match. And then you are. And nobody has to know about it, or you can tell everyone. And there's no way to be transgender. There's no right way. You can be for sure a trans man or for sure a trans woman, or you can be somewhere on that non-binary spectrum and all of that's valid. You don't have to do anything. You just are. I always say you don't have to take a class. When you know, you know. Same with like being gay. When you know, you know. But speaking of transitions, that's something that a lot of folks also have questions with, especially around children. So let's go through that. The first major transition is a social transition, or the first thing we're going to talk about is social transition. And this happens when folks say, okay, this is my name, these are my pronouns, and they start to dress in a way that is more authentic to them, and they start presenting in ways that are more authentic to them. That's a social transition, and it's really awesome when people do that. But it's not the only way to transition. It's not required to transition. Another way you can transition is medically. A perfect story would be a child, as soon as that child is old enough to speak, they go, I am not a girl, I am not a girl, I'm not a girl, and then the doctor goes, that's persistent, consistent, insistent. Great. Let's keep an eye on that, encourage that child to be who they are. And then when they start to go through puberty, that is stopped with hormone blockers. So they do not have to experience trauma going through puberty. And then when the doctors and the parents and the child come to a place that they're ready to take hormones, they take hormones. And then if they want to have surgery, they have surgery, right, when they're older. And that's a perfect medical transition where the child is not harmed in any way, right? That's happening more and more, but that's not always how it goes. Right? Some people have illness where they can't transition. I know a non-binary child who has got cancer, can't wear a binder, can't do anything to transition medically, can barely transition socially. So, that happens, right? And then legally, but you don't have to do any of that to be transgender. That does not have to be part of your transition. It is an expensive process, so that might be one barrier. Another barrier is people don't want to have people touching their bodies. That's totally legitimate. And then legally is totally different. So you have to change your name, your driver's license, your social security card. You can change your birth certificate, but only once. And all these things cost money too. So really, if someone's transitioning, that could mean a lot of stuff. If they're transitioning and they're telling you about it, it probably means they're transitioning socially. And again, you can use that phrase. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to tell me more about that? I'm curious. I want to know the best way to support. Totally cool, totally fine thing to say. Unless you don't know them, then don't say that. It might feel weird to them. Let's talk about pronouns, because I said a little bit about pronouns. There's a lot of pronouns in the world. We use 2 very often, and we use 1 less often, but still use it. And that's she, her, and he, him. And then we use they, them. There's other pronouns. These are called neo-pronouns. Our population is just so creative. And because people were not accepting the they, them pronoun, we invented our own. And there's so many. There's 40 of these. And when someone says that these are their pronouns, it's easy to practice them and respect them. But I think the most important thing that I want you to get out of tonight is that they, them is a singular pronoun. It can be a singular pronoun. Who's that on the phone? What do they want? Someone left their book bag here. I hope they aren't missing it. We should tell them to, come back and get it or whatever. We use the they, them pronoun all the time. It's only when we're talking about gender that it feels weird. And I would encourage everyone to get comfortable with that, because it's happening, whether or not it feels good to you or whether or not you understand it. The they, them pronoun is getting super popular with our kids. And it's cool, right? It's a cool way to make sure people are feeling respected. So I use they, them until I know somebody's pronouns. I'll just be like, oh yeah, they said this, they said that. And then if someone else uses pronouns with the other person present and there's not a weirdness, I'm like, cool, it's probably she, her. Or email signature, right? I have my pronouns in my email signature. My name is Sam. I used to get misgendered all the time, and I'm cisgender. People just thought I was a dude because of my name. So I think that it's one of those things we just have to know that's on the horizon. Some people conjugate it in a singular way, which is unduly confusing for me, but some people might ask you to do that, and that's fun gymnastics for you to learn. But I've never met anyone that's like, you said they are instead of they is. Use the they pronoun, practice the they pronoun, and you can make someone stay. There's a lot of data that says using an affirming name and an affirming pronoun saves lives. So that feels really small for us to be uncomfortable for a second. Okay, so let's talk about myths. Cool. So being trans is a phase. Maybe not. However, not supporting a trans person who's saying they're trans is traumatic. So don't do that. It could be, to get medical treatment, it is persistent, consistent, insistent. So it might be one of those. And it might be something somebody's exploring. It's a normal thing to explore your gender and your sexual orientation and all of the parts of you. However, assuming that it's a phase or talking to someone like it's a phase is condescending and can really hurt your relationship and is maybe not what's going on, so it's bad to assume that. So another thing let's talk about names. So when someone changes their names, they go through that social transition, they say, okay, my name is Mary. Having to deal with that other name, let's say the name they were born with, or that they were on their birth certificate was Max, okay? That once folks have transitioned to Mary, they don't like to be, they don't even want to hear or see that Max again. It's actually so real and can be so traumatizing. It's called the dead name. So to dead name someone is a really, really bad thing to do. So you don't want to ever do that. This is tricky when it comes to legal stuff, because you might need someone's legal name, and if they haven't legally changed it, we're in a pickle. So I always encourage people to have, if they need a legal name, to say, what's your legal name, and have a place where they can write it down and keep it confidential. And then what's your preferred name? And for me, I'm Sam, but my legal name is Samantha. I wouldn't think twice about that. It's very helpful for trans people. Okay, cool. I got this last night too. Trans people are trying to be cool and different. And my uncle said, oh, isn't that true? And I was like, there are a lot of ways to be cool and different. You should see these high schools. They have got every color of the rainbow hair, everybody's belly button is out. We've got the coolest shoes. Book bags. You don't have, that's not the thing that I would pick to be cool and different. If I could, if that's what I wanted to be. I think what is happening is people in this age group in middle school and high school and college, you're exploring who you are. So if your friend says, I think I'm this, it would not be weird at all for you to be like, I'm going to think about that too. I've not really thought about that. But no, there's a lot of other ways to be cool and different that are less traumatic and dangerous. Cool. Trans people in bathrooms. This is a myth. There is no data that says that trans people are dangerous in bathrooms. The data says bathrooms are dangerous for trans people. I know a lot of kiddos that don't use the bathroom at school and get UTIs because they do not want to use the bathroom in their school. There's not a safe place for them to go. I know a kid whose mom is the first one in car rider line and gets that kid to the gas station every day after school because that kid has to go to the bathroom so bad. Trans people are not a threat in bathrooms. Bathrooms are a target zone. Like how libraries are safe, bathrooms are not. So it's just something to be aware of, that this is a totally flipped myth. It's good if you can't tell someone's trans. No, I think this is one that people, like in their eagerness to be allies, will say to like a trans woman, "You're so pretty. Oh my gosh, you're prettier than me." That's not a compliment, right? This is you look so much like a woman. That can be really hurtful because that trans woman is a woman already. That's just how she looks, right? And so I think we have this idea that trans people, it's like good, like you're doing a great job pretending to be a woman. That's not helpful, right? And that's not true. So there is a thing it's called passing. That's taken from passing with people of color, and this can be necessary out of safety. Just like we were talking about bathrooms, my buddies, my trans masculine buddies that have testosterone, it takes a long time to grow a beard, and when they get that beard, it is a safety, right? I can go in the bathroom and nobody's going to stop me, right? Maybe it's more of a safety thing. So passing can be about safety too, but it's not necessarily a good thing or what somebody wants. Or even what somebody wants to hear as a compliment. I think people would much rather you tell them how cute they look in their outfit. Just saying. All trans people are out, also not true. So trans people are trans because their sex assigned at birth and their gender identity don't match. And your gender identity happens in your head, and your sex assigned at birth happens under your clothes. So there's no reason that you could know somebody's transgender. There's no reason unless they tell you, right? Especially if folks are passing because that just worked out for them and that's what they look like. Especially little kids. I know a lot of trans girls who look like little girls because they are little girls and that's what they want to look like. And when there's no differences in body, right? So I think that is called being stealth. If no one knows about you, then you're stealth, or if only a couple of people know about you. And that would be the word if you hear is like, okay, yes, like the new student, Aiden is trans, he's stealth. That means we don't talk about it, no one knows. We just know because we're the health teachers or whatever. We just know because we're his teacher, or his mom is telling me, but we're not telling the kids right now because we're in 3rd grade or whatever. And lastly, that all trans people have mental illness, or because they're unhappy and they're unhealthy. This is complicated because you have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria to get transition treatment, which is in the DSM. And it's a double-edged sword because that's technically a mental illness, even though we know it's not a mental illness, like obviously. You have to get that diagnosis, and then you can get insurance to pay for your surgery or your whatever. Mm-hmm.
Do you think the next DSM they're going to finally change it like they did for homosexuality in the 70s?
I don't know that people are actually advocating for that because then.
Oh, because then they can't have a surgery.
Yeah, I don't think people are advocating for that. They might be, but I mean these are very, very expensive surgeries, and if you get the gender dysphoria diagnosis, and you jump through all their hoops, and you get your doctors, you go through all these gatekeepers, right? Then you can get surgery, and insurance is involved. I don't know. And and I say this to be totally clear with you all, that transgender folks do not have mental illness because they're transgender. Transgender folks have mental illness because they live in a world that is transphobic. You know, it's not being trans that made them have that mental illness, because there is a high rate of depression and anxiety, of course, because you're living in a world that says you don't exist here and we don't accept you for who you are. Of course. So I think that's really important too when we're talking about trans people, because trans people can feel so other. There's reasons that these things exist, and it's not, these stereotypes exist, and it's not necessarily what we think. Cool. Let's go through harmful or unhelpful terms. I'm not going to say them because they're unharmful and unhelpful, but I will tell you a little bit about them, talking about the bullet. So the first one is a biological term that folks used to call intersex people. And it's really harmful and unhelpful because it doesn't describe intersex. Intersex is differences in our chromosomes, our DNA, our external organs, our primary and secondary sex characteristics. This one is 2 full sets of reproductive systems, which does not happen in human beings. So that can be really harmful for people. The next 2 in that second bullet were used historically by folks, have then turned into slurs, and now are not used. But some older folks in our community do use them. And again, like the word queer, like it's okay to be offended by the word queer because you've experienced it in a negative way. It's okay for them to use these words because this is the way that that's their lived experience, right?
I'm sorry, that's usually for an older generation?
Like an older folks who didn't have the word transgender, because that's a fairly new word. Yeah. This third one isn't necessarily, I'll say this one because it's not necessarily a term, it's just incorrect. You don't put the ED on transgender, it's not transgendered. It's not something that happened to someone like they got rear-ended, right? That's it's just wrong. It's just a describing word, right? It's just an adjective. Cool, all right, so these next ones are words that people may use in other cultures, but they're still here in our culture. They're big no-nos, they're very unhelpful, they're very hurtful. I don't have the F word up here, the F slur, but that still gets used in high schools. That still gets used when you're out on the street in Boston and people think that you might be transgender. I mean, it happens. People use this word too. These next 2 are more, actually these last 3 are things that kids say that are hurtful. And the first 2 being that you're sort of talking about trans women, that they try to trick straight men into being in a relationship. So that's what they're doing, really hurtful. And these last ones really just means that's stupid, or like you are gay. And that's very popular with students too, specifically no homo. That's the one that I would do anything to rid the world of. Just take that out, stop using that. So I hope this is helpful. We know about microaggressions, we've talked about microaggressions, but it's so real for trans people to have to deal with just like, I work with trans people, it's like you just watch the microaggressions just break them down, right? Every day. It's horrible. So let's prevent them, okay? You can't always prevent them, but let's try. I think the first thing to understand is that like most people are good. They just are. We're just trying our best. Our intentions are good, especially if you're here, like you're a good person, you get like 10 stars. But that doesn't mean your impact is gonna always be what you want it to be. So I think that's really when we need to be very careful about our language, because our language is so gendered. Our language is we just say things on autopilot, sometimes when we're doing small talk, or when we are asking a question, or when we're addressing a group of folks, boys and girls, come to lunch, line up at the door. All right, boys and girls, settle down. Like if you're if you're around youth or whatever, or women and gentlemen and women and I don't even know how to say that one anymore. I don't say that one anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, there we go. But yeah, so that obviously the intention is not to exclude people, but I've heard so many painful little stories of folks that are like, oh yeah, every time the teacher said boys and girls, I didn't know what to do because I was either lying or I would get in trouble. And so every time I had to line up, I had to pick that, I knew I was wrong. And it just breaks you down. Back when you were a boy, sort of assuming that was their identity before, the word decide in this third one, that it was a decision, all of these things are implied in our language. So we just have to be careful, this sort of, you're so much prettier than me, these whole ideas of us trying to be nice or trying to be encouraging, we just have to be careful because our impact, it can be really harmful still. And I think that's frustrating. I think that's what keeps people from wanting to really be serious allies, because you're gonna make mistakes, period. Look, I knew it. You're gonna make mistakes. And this is a good life hack, and also a good, for all of the world, all of your life, that you're gonna make mistakes, that happens. And you just have to accept that they happened. And I think that's really hard, especially with this stuff. I just hear people all the time going, well, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, I mispronoun, teachers talking to me, I mispronoun my kids sometimes, but I'm doing 100 things. It's not that big of a deal. And yes, that teacher is doing 100 things, but it is a big deal still to that kid. And so we have to accept that it actually happened. And then we have to learn from it. So that it doesn't count if we don't learn from it, which is hard too, because that means that we have to intentionally put some time into our mistake and figure out what we did. And sometimes we don't have time for that, but again, it's about prioritizing. Apologizing, again, hard, because you don't want to do it in a way that makes the other person have to take care of you. And I see that all the time, where someone's like, I'm so sorry, can you ever forgive me? I'm trying my very best, da-da-da-da. So much that the person is begging you to say, well, it's okay, don't worry about it. And it's not okay. That person was upset about it, right? And then moving on. So this is also hard, because we are going to think about that mistake, especially if we were serious and we thought about it, we learned from it, and we were intentional about it. We're going to think about it. And you have to forgive yourself, because people make mistakes. We're all human. And this is basically what I just said. So let's go through Ally 101, and then we'll just open up for questions, okay? So we want to respect privacy. We want to not assume. So this is really tempting, especially as an LGBTQ educator. I can always tell the queer kids in my classrooms, I'm like, you maybe, you definitely. But you can't do that, right? You can't do that, because that's just gender expression. That's not even anything. We know we can't do that. So what we want to do is we want to set signals. We want to send signals that we're safe, that we're a person those people can come to, if and when they feel like they need support or they have questions. But we can't assume or gossip about someone that we think probably, maybe, right? It's not helpful to that person, or to, especially because it's going to create the community that's thinking about this and talking about this. So when we're talking about sending signals that we're a safe person, that's using, I'm going to talk about this, that's gender neutral language. Maybe I don't have it up here. That's gender neutral language. That's really being thoughtful about our language. That's really being conscious of how we talk about people in our world. That's bringing up your LGBTQ friends to your kids, or talking about LGBTQ things with your family or with your group of friends in your community, because it's not weird. We're just humans, we're just here. And I think what we get is we get stressed about talking about something like we're gonna make a mistake, but instead talking about it at all makes it normal for kids and for folks around you. So it makes it more normal and makes it more like, oh yeah, that's just how some people are. Some people have green eyes. We want to always be learning and practicing. They, them is a great way to get started. Also, there's a lot of cool information out there. If you go just dig a little bit, this deep into the internet, GLSEN is an excellent resource. The HRC has some good stuff. PFLAG, of course, we have all of our booklets back here, but we have more online. There's a ton of resources available to us because we've got the internet. It's cool. Asking pronouns and sharing your pronouns feels uncomfortable the first 100 times you do it, and then it feels super normal after that. And I would just challenge you to go through those 100 times now rather than in 5 years when you're still working and everyone's doing that, Stop it, name it, claim it. So I think this really is about emboldening yourself, that if someone's talking about something or maybe talking about one of the myths we discussed, being like, hey, actually, that's not true. you know? And I think people are afraid to do that because we're afraid of confrontation and la la la. But it's important because I think now that you all are here and you have this information, it's your job to go like spread it to all of Chelmsford. Am I saying your city right? Chelmsford? It doesn't feel right on my mouth, but I believe you. All right, and then finally just are making mistakes. We gotta do that, and we've gotta be brave. And that is really the you know, my call out to you all is just to be really brave because this stuff can feel uncomfortable. And I'm here as a resource. Now that you've come to one of my trainings, I am your LGBTQ guru. My card is back there. Please contact me with any of your questions. And I will give you the best information that I have. Cool. I can talk more. I have some information about parenting, but I'm not a parent, and I do feel weird about talking about it, but I can. But I know that it's not quite 9. How about we get questions? Yeah, well, I've just only been here an hour. I'm amazing. All right, what questions do we have? Anything about, yeah.
So one of my questions is kind of weird, but when you say boys and girls, is the best way to do that correctly to just say children? Or like if you were like boys, girls, and everything in between, or other?
I would say, hello, children. Yeah. Hello, folks. Hello, friends. Hello, angels. Hello, demons. Just depending on who you're talking to. Yeah, but like we're creative. I'm sorry. I feel like I've been trying to get you all the whole time. I have to stand right here because of the camera. Yeah, I think that you can do that. I think a way to just make it not so, binary. Anything to make it not so binary is helpful. Yeah.
When I was in the school, we would, depending on what activity we were working on. Okay, readers.
Yeah.
You just.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
High school, and so I just say
Oh, great.
Scholars.
Yeah, scholars.
Right.
Right, exactly. That's, it's really, it's just being mindful, I think, is really powerful. And that's true in like everything, right? So now that, we've talked about it for a little while, my hope is that it's just a mindfulness that you carry into whatever you work or whatever you do, that, gender and sexuality and all that's just like a little bit more complicated. And I think that's really my goal, and making you feel like cool with that. That's my goal when I present, is like, that's how we exist in the world. Other questions? Nothing? I'm sure you have questions. Yes?
When are things going with like forms where you're supposed to check a box? I'm just wondering.
Some people do great. Some people are changing their forms. Some people are not.
Yeah.
And it's going to be real awkward when all of these middle schoolers start going to college or start doing stuff and they're all they, them, non-binary kids. I mean, just handfuls and handfuls and oodles in every school I go to. People are going to have to change. Like, it's just like going to have to be true. Specifically here in Massachusetts, trans and non-binary kids exist in North Carolina, but they're not so emboldened. We have protection. So our law says in school, I was going to make a joke, like all you have to do to set the stage is just all those things we already talked about. But we have laws in school that says, all this stuff, that you cannot discriminate against children based on gender identity. And that's been the law for a long time. And now we have this law, or now we have the other law that says you can't discriminate based on gender identity or sexual orientation, in places of public accommodation. So trans people, by law, are protected way more in Massachusetts than they are in like most every other state. But I think as, things change, that will be different. People have to make changes. Other questions?
I'll keep asking.
Yeah, go for it.
When you said you could change your birth certificate only once, can you change it so there's nothing? Or
Oh.
do you have to get it switched?
And now I'm like wondering if it's birth certificate. I'm pretty sure it's birth certificate, that you can change like your legal name as many times as you want. It costs money, but you can't change you can only change your birth certificate once, and I don't think it could be blank. I do not think they would want that, for records and stuff,
Yeah, right.
for data keeping. But maybe. Let me know. Check it out and let me know. Yep. Other questions?
I'll ask mine just to you.
Okay. Well, I can show you too. So not only do we have those laws, but we have, I might have passed it already. So our Department of Education actually released guidelines around how to deal with a child transitioning. So we actually have on the books a guideline that schools have to follow. So that is like easily accessible on the internet. So if that's ever a resource that you need, it's pretty thick. I usually have copies, but I don't today. I got cleaned out at Pride. I need to make some more copies. But it's a super interesting resource that Massachusetts has that actually the Obama administration used to write their guidelines. Of course, those guidelines were rescinded recently, but that's how good our guidelines are, as they were used to create a national model. Yep, so we have that. I will say that when you find out that a child is LGBTQ, when someone comes out to you or you find out, or you're like, oh yeah, mom, Susie's non-binary, obviously, like, come on. It's, and Susie's there with you. I think the best way is to have a plan, because it's so big for that child, and the way you respond is so important. So I just say, respect and affirm. You don't have to understand anything that's going on. Because I feel like you want to know exactly what's going on, or like how to, be like, yes, I absolutely know everything about this. Like, your only job in that moment is to be like, that is great. And I've had lots of examples on the PowerPoint presentation. I went through, me and a couple of queer people sat down and were like, what do we wish our experience had been? And we wrote these because we think, I think that there's so much fear around that too. And there can be so much fear as a parent or as a teacher or as, whoever, because we know the statistics about LGBTQ kids, like, it can be so scary and stressful. And that's totally valid and real. However, this is what you have to do if a child comes out with you. This is the way to create safety for that child. And then I have a mom that says, for the first year, I just went to I would be cooking dinner with my kid, and then I would turn the stove off, and I'd go to the bathroom, and I'd cry a little bit, and I'd come back out, and then I would just keep cooking dinner, right? And, that's such a powerful model of a parent that wants their child to feel safe, but also is struggling, right? And that's fair. We always talk about how the kids had that child or that person has had a long time to figure out who they are, and it's not new news for them when someone tells you their identity, right? That same mother, love her so much. She was maybe going to come tonight, but she couldn't. She said, when my child came out as transgender, I didn't even know what transgender meant, but I knew it meant the world to him. And I think that is just as we're talking about these labels and as we're talking about people describing themselves, I think that's the most important thing for us to take away is when people tell you a little bit about themselves, especially around this, it's just them telling you something that means the world to them. So it's okay if you don't know what it means. It's okay if you don't know anything or next steps. That's why we're here. And that's why we do the researches we do. And the most important thing is we just want parents to create that safe place for their child and have those resources to do it. So look, I talked about parenting too. Cool. That's just for schools. And that GSAs are awesome. That's the last thing I was going to say. They're really cool. We love GSAs. We know that they statistically help kids at school too, create a social network and support. So I always advocate for GSAs, and I will happily talk to you about starting one at your school if you're interested. We have to rethink gendered activities. I had a principal call me last semester and was like, what do we do about our powder puff game? I was like, yeah, you need to figure that out. You can't say, okay, boys, put on your cheerleading uniforms and be cheerleaders. That's not okay. What if you did the football team and the softball team or the cheerleaders, and the cheerleaders play the baseball team or something like that? We do it in a way that's not so much we're making fun of boys in dresses and it's funny, that kind of thing. Or somebody was saying we hold a womanless beauty pageant every year. I was like, nope. You can't do that anymore either. So how would you how can you make it to where you have to be creative to create these same sort of experiences for students that are fun and interesting and silly, but aren't intrinsically transphobic or homophobic, right? And that's easy to do. It's easy to do things that are transphobic and homophobic because the binary, right? Super easy. However, we have to be more creative than that, and we are. Like, humans are more creative than that. So we just have to think about it in a different way. Yeah. Sports in schools, a whole other topic, lots of things that people are, talking about and thinking about. But cool. Well, I appreciate you all coming. Yeah. Take as many materials as you want. I have to carry that all back up a flight of stairs. So if if anything's speaking to you, or you think somebody in your life would like to read one of those things, please take it. I have our email address back there, and my card, and how to get me to come to any of the communities that you're involved in. I would happily do that. So thank you.